This video is going to be on naming organic compounds. So firstly I'm going to go through some key definitions that you'll need to learn for this section, and then I'm going to show you how to name straight chain alkanes and branched alkanes. And then I'm going to have a table of different functional groups that you might come across at A level. And finally I'm just going to go through a couple of examples on how to name compounds that contain different functional groups. Okay, starting off with the definitions then. Hydrocarbon is a compound of carbon and hydrogen only. A saturated hydrocarbon is where every carbon atom in that hydrocarbon is bonded to 4 other atoms through single bonds only. So we don't see any carbon-carbon double bonds or carbon-carbon triple bonds. A functional group is an atom or a group of atoms which, when present in different molecules, causes them to have similar chemical properties. A homologous series is a number of compounds that have the same general formula, similar chemical properties, the same functional group, and they show a trend in their physical properties. And finally, there are some general formulae for some homologous series. So for alkanes, the general formula is CnH2n plus 2, alkenes, CnH2n, alcohols, CnH2n plus 1, OH, and in all cases N is always an integer. So when it comes to naming organic compounds, the name of the compound should unambiguously tell us the structure of the compound. It should also tell us how many carbon atoms are in the skeleton and if there are any branches on that skeleton. If there are, it should tell us where they are, how long the branches are, and how many of them there are. And finally, it should tell you what the functional group is and where it is. Okay, so if we start with straight chain alkanes, which have the general formula CnH2n plus 2. These are the names of the alkanes with increasing numbers of carbon atoms, and notice that the names all end in "ane", so they can be identified by the suffix. So what if we have branched alkanes? So if that branch has one carbon atom, then that's called a methyl group. If the branch has 2 carbon atoms, then that's called an ethyl group. And if it has 3 carbon atoms, then that's called a propyl group, and so on and so forth. So for example, if we have the alkane with molecular formula C6H14, how do we go about naming this? So firstly, we need to find the longest chain. And then, so in this case it's 5 carbon atoms in the longest chain, and then we need to number that chain so that the branch, the methyl group, has the smallest number. So whether we number from left to right or right to left, the carbon that has the methyl group is the 3rd one along the chain. So the name of this branched alkane would be 3-methylpentane, and that's all written as one word. So the 3 tells us that there's a branch on the 3rd carbon atom in the chain. Methyl tells us that that branch is a methyl group, and pentane tells us that the carbon skeleton has 5 carbon atoms in the longest chain. Okay, so what if we have multiple branches? Okay, so this has the same molecular formula as before, C6H14, but now we have 2 branches. So it's just the same again. Identify the longest chain. In this case, there's 4 carbon atoms in the longest chain, and then we number that chain. It doesn't matter whether we number from left to right or right to left, because the molecule is symmetrical. And we can see that there are methyl branches on the 2nd and 3rd carbon atoms in the chain. So the name of this would be 2,3-dimethylbutane. So the 2 and the 3 tells us that there are branches on the second and third carbon in the chain. Di tells us there are 2 branches, and the methyl tells us that both of those branches are methyl groups. And butane tells us that the longest chain has 4 carbon atoms. So here's a table summarising all the different functional groups that you might come across at A level. And I'm not going to say much about this, but just point out that the names of the functional groups can be identified by either a prefix or a suffix. So for alkenes, the names all end in "ene", and haloalkanes, the names all begin with the identity of the halogen in the haloalkane. So just a couple of examples in naming compounds that contain different functional groups. So again, we identify the longest chain that includes the functional group, and then we number the chain so that the functional group has the smallest number. So the first example, the longest chain contains 4 carbon atoms, and so if we number from right to left, the carbon that contains the functional group, the alcohol, is the second one along that chain. So this would be called butan 2-ol. Butan tells us there are 4 carbon atoms in the longest chain. 2 tells us on the second carbon in the chain, that's the one that contains the functional group, and ol tells us that that functional group is an alcohol. Okay, so what if we have 2 functional groups in the molecule? Then we number the chain so that the halogens are in alphabetical order. So bromo comes before chloro, so this would be called 1-bromo 2-chloroethane.